Hi everybody, so this month we are focusing on drawing and painting people, and in this video I wanted to show you my process for sketching people because you can't paint them until you've sketched them first. So people are simultaneously probably the most difficult thing to draw, but in my opinion one of the most rewarding things to draw. People are complicated, we've got a lot of joints, a lot of moving parts, and we move and bend and twist and do all sorts of different things, and we also have emotions and mood and body language, and we move. So people are phenomenally complicated. You've got the physicality of the body, but also the movements and maybe emotions and personality that you want to capture. The other thing is, when a person doesn't look right in a drawing, we can normally tell. There's a lot less leeway, I think, with people compared to, say, drawing a flower or a tree or a landscape. And if something's a bit wonky, people aren't really going to know. But, if someone's elbow is in completely the wrong place, unfortunately, we will notice, people will notice. Often you don't realise at the time because you're so into the painting or the drawing, and you only notice later. And I say that from experience. There's a piece I can remember doing years ago. It was like a girl playing an accordion. And I don't think I was doing it from a reference photo. I think it was from imagination. I was working on it, and I could not work out what was wrong with it. And I looked at it years later, and I was like, well, her arms are like twice as long as they should be, and the elbows in completely the wrong place. Like, looking back, it was really obvious, but at the time, I couldn't figure it out. So that happens to everybody, that you get lost in the drawing, and it's a battle between what you think people look like and what they actually look like. So I'm going to share my sketching process with you in terms of how I capture people and get their proportions right, and simplify things. So what I'm going to be showing you is not the best way to draw people or the right way to draw people. It's just my way to draw people, and every artist has got a different outcome when it comes to capturing people. For me, it's not about photorealism at all. My people are stylized and they are simplified, but at the same time they are observed from life, either directly from life, somebody in front of me, or from photo. So, and I do want to have that kind of a certain level of, not photorealism, but just realism. I want people to make sense, feel like, oh, we know what that person is doing. And for me, that sweet spot is kind of capturing things being simplified yet feeling right, feeling true. I really like the interplay of those two things. But some artists will lean more towards stylizing and simplifying, and other artists will lean way more towards accuracy and realism. So yeah, this is just showing you my process, how I sketch, and I have done this demo on the iPad. I do sketch quite often on the iPad, and I sketch in my sketchbook with pencil, but I thought it would be easier to see what I'm doing on the iPad, because then my hand isn't in the way blocking the sketch, my head isn't in the way blocking the sketch. You can just see everything that I'm doing. And you can see a big part of it is making mistakes, correcting them as I go along. And all the photos that I'm using I've got from Unsplash, so those are royalty-free photos. But I hope you enjoy. So, very first photo, this photo is actually going to be one of our weekly drawing challenges, so you can kind of see how I would approach sketching this from the beginning. So I don't know why, I just really loved the photo of this guy picking lemons. His face is in profile, and we've got some nice movement, and I like that he's in his setting and it looks very unposed. Quite often our reference photos from stock websites, that kind of thing, can look very, very posed, but I liked that this looked quite natural and unposed, and I want my people to look natural. So I'm starting off by sketching the head, and you can see I've kind of got a curve for the back of the head. The front of his face I've kind of got straight, and I'm going to add the nose later. And then I've got a curve of the neck, and you can see the jawline. So I'm starting with that first. And I always start with a really, really rough sketch, getting the simplified shapes in, and then add more detail later, because there's no point fiddling around and getting, you know, the detail of like a hand or something perfect if that hand's in the wrong place. So always sketch lightly and loosely first and look for shapes. So I'm looking at the slope of his back and looking how his shoulders kind of dropped down. So his physically his shoulders dropped down, the shoulder closest to us, the viewer, but also the kind of sleeve is also set quite low. And then the other shoulder, I'm looking for reference points all the time, so I can see the top of his arm, the arm that's reaching for the lemon, is level with his nose. So that's a nice easy reference point. And then I can see his hand is holding a lemon, and that's resting on his chest. So that helps me replacing that arm. I don't have to deal with the other hand because it's in a tree. But I can see, I feel like the arm kind of arches up and curves slightly. And where his t-shirt is bunched up, I've kind of done a zigzaggy line, just sketching the bag. Honestly, that plastic bag gave me the most problems out of anything. Yeah, just working on the shape of his arms. So when I draw arms, I normally kind of taper them down to the wrist, so they get sort of thinner at the wrist and then widen out again at the hand, which is kind of true for most people and kind of signifies that this is the wrist, and also helps give movement and kind of positioning to the arm. So just sketching in his hair. And then eyebrow and the eye and a little bit of stubble. So I've gone really simplified with the eyes. For me, it's always a balance between what I want to simplify, like the eyes, facial features, and what I want to feel more kind of realistic, observed from life. And then I'm just going back over, so this is my more detailed layer. So I've added a second layer on Procreate, but if you were doing this in a sketchbook, which you probably will be, or on paper, it's just a case of going over and pressing harder with your pencil. Maybe slightly erasing what's underneath, or just sketching very, very lightly the first time. The other thing you could do is, if you have a light box, you could at this point put a second bit of paper on top and turn your light box on and work over the top. Or if your base sketch is really, really messy, what you could do is, if it's on a bit of paper, you can put it on the window, put another bit of paper on the window and kind of trace over it. So, or you could use tracing paper. So there's loads of ways to kind of create a second, neater sketch from your first very, very rough sketch. So I'm kind of going back over and some things I'm slightly adjusting and changing and neatening up. So some places like the arm and the back, I've drawn a line several times, so I'll just go back over one line that feels right. But the main thing I would say with a sketch like this is always looking for reference points. Where is the arm in relation to his nose? Where is the hand in relation to his chest? Where's the elbow in relation to the bag, to his waist? And sketching what's actually there, not what you think is there. Because if someone asked me to draw a man picking lemons and I did another reference photo, I probably would have drawn the arm maybe much lower down. It wouldn't be kind of behind his head the way it is. Whereas that's obviously what it looks like if you're kind of lifting your arm up to get something. So it is really useful to look at what is actually there. And I'm just very roughly putting the leaves in, and then his hair, and little things like that make such a difference. And this guy's pretty much done. I'm quite happy with how he's turned out. Okay, so for this piece, we've got a reference photo of a girl sketching. I'm not going to sketch the whole scene. This is all about seeing shapes of the shape of the body. So what I look at straight away is the line of her shoulders and her arms, and that's creating a kind of trapezoid shape. So the arms kind of come out, it's sort of wider at the elbows than it is at the shoulders. So I'm kind of sketching that first. What I start with really varies. Normally I start with the head, but sometimes there's a really strong shape. So for me, the arms are the strong shape in this, so I'm starting with that first. But if sometimes someone's very hunched over or arched back, and then the back's the really strong shape, so I would start with that first. So whatever kind of defines the pose. So we've got the head kind of slightly in profile, so putting in the jaw and roughly putting in where the bun is at the nape of her neck, which is helping define it. And then I've put sort of a line down the middle to show where the midline of the face is, and then very, very roughly put in eyebrow, eye and cheek, just to get that roughly in the right place. And then the parting again, just to help with the direction of the head. And then putting in the neckline, which really helps with the direction of the body and where the head and the neck is placed. And then looking at that second shoulder, and I think our tendency would be to put that second shoulder much lower, because we tend to think you have a head and then you have a neck and then a shoulder comes underneath the neck. But actually, the way that she's sitting, her shoulders are quite high up, so it's about looking for that reference point and looking at the shoulder is actually right up by her cheek on that side. It's not, down where her collarbone is or where the neck of her t-shirt is. So putting that in, looking that it's going to be slightly smaller than the other arm because it's not in the foreground, and then creating that trapezoid shape with the arms, and keeping the hand really simple. Hands are so tricky, but putting the pen in, looking at the angle that the pen is, which then helps us understand that that is a hand sketching, and just very roughly putting in a bit of the desk and the paper. And now I've got the very rough sketch. I'm happy with the composition. I can go in with more details. And the thing I love about creating sketches like this is now that I have the really tricky part, the pose, I can use it for something else. So let's say I'm doing a sketch for a magazine or a personal project, or, and I want to have an artist sketching. I can use this person's body language and pose, but I could put a different outfit on her. I could completely change how she looks. But the basic kind of posture, where the arms are, where the head is, how she looks when she's drawing, that I'll keep the same, but I can easily put her in a more interesting outfit, change her hairstyle, that kind of thing. So it's really useful to build a reference library of sketches of people like this, at least for me as an illustrator. And again, I'm using these kind of wiggly lines to show movement in the fabric and show where it's naturally creasing. Oh, and if anybody's wondering, I'm sketching this on Procreate, and I'm using the 6B pencil, which is what I use for everything that I sketch. I find it a really good versatile brush. And I'm not using pure black, it's like a kind of a softer charcoaly colour, but I really like it for sketching. Putting in the jaw, which is really important, the lips, so the kind of side of the face that we can see, the lips kind of come to a point, and then the other side is sort of shorter because it's turning away. She hasn't really got rosy cheeks, but I'm putting a bit of shading in on the cheek just to sort of show that's where the cheek is, and there's a little bit of a hollow where her cheekbone is. Just putting a tiny bit of shading in. Just putting in that lovely strand of hair and adding some more detail to the neckline, and turning down the opacity on the initial sketch so it neatens it up, and that piece is pretty much done. So for the next sketch I wanted to do a person sitting, which can be tricky because you've got perspective and foreshortening, and people sitting is just generally quite tricky. So I've started by sketching her head as an oval, but then I've put in a line for the jaw and the side of the face because her face is sort of slightly turning away from us, so it's quite angular. I've put in her neck and her shoulders. At this point, it's more important for me to know where her shoulders are rather than to be sketching her hair, so I'll add the hair afterwards. And then putting in the arm. So we've got a similar pose to the one before, in that we've got this kind of trapezoid shape, so her elbows are wider at the bottom and then her shoulders are narrower. So looking at that kind of big shape created by the arms and the torso and putting that in. However, it's different to the previous pose because she's looking up and away rather than looking down. So because she's looking up, that gives us that bit of space in between her jaw and her shoulder that we didn't have in the previous picture. So just putting in her arms, her hands very roughly, and then putting her leg in. So trying to look for reference points here. So looking where does her hip come in relation to her elbow, and then looking at her knees, how far do her knees stick out compared to her other elbow. So her legs look large compared to the rest of us because of the perspective, so they're closer to us. And then putting on her foot, which feet are always tricky, but I've just kept it kind of very simple, just sketched in her sock and her ankle. And the other foot is kind of tucked underneath so we can't see it, which always makes life easier. One less foot to draw. And then roughly sketching in her hair and where it's sitting now that I've got the shoulders there. But for me, it's important to get the shoulders there first and rest the hair on the shoulders rather than just be sketching hair. And then I'm putting in the chair because it's a lovely chair and I don't want her to be just floating in space, and it kind of really informs her pose. So I'm looking for those reference points. So the top of the chair is level with her shoulder, her feet are resting against the arm of the chair. Looking back against this now, I can see that her feet are sticking out a little bit too far because her elbow is also nearly touching the arm of the chair, which it isn't in my sketch. So it's looking for these reference points helps you notice what's working and what isn't working, what's wrong. So if I redid this sketch, I could adjust that. But on the other hand, I quite like that her legs are, the proportions, the perspective is exaggerated. I quite like what that adds to the scene. It makes it feel very cosy. So very roughly sketching in her face at this point, and then when I do my neater top sketch, I will tidy up the face. I'm just kind of getting eyes and mouth in the right place, and adding in the neck of her jumper, and then reducing the opacity on that, and then doing another layer on top. So just going over the top of that, just neatening it up. Just putting in the lines of the hair, her jawline, and details on the neck of her jumper, that sort of folded cowl neck. So a piece like this is a really useful sketch to have for me as an illustrator. There's loads of ways that I could adapt this kind of basic sketch. So I could put her in a really lovely colourful outfit. I could have a pattern on the chair. I could make it really cosy with like cushions. I could add a dog. I could make a really lovely scene, which would work well on a greetings card, or it might work for an editorial illustration. So for me as an illustrator, having sketches like this of kind of people doing stuff is always really useful, because once I've got the tricky part, which is the person in the pose, then I can adapt it in lots of different ways, and choosing different outfits, different settings, that kind of thing is the fun part, and means that I could adapt it for different uses. So I'm just zooming in on her face because I'm using Procreate, so I can zoom in. But if I was doing this in my sketchbook with pencil, I would just lean in closer to the paper, good old-fashioned zoom in. So the way I do eyes is I just draw the top lash line and the pupil. I don't bother drawing the lower lash line or outline the whole eye, and I don't draw the iris either. So putting in the eyebrows, and when I draw like a nose on the side like this, I connect the kind of eyebrow that's further away from us to the nose, which then gives that kind of shape, and the eye kind of being tucked into that sort of hollow of the eyebrow and the nose, if that makes sense. And just bring a little bit of shading on her cheek, because it you can see there is a slight hollow under her cheekbone and there is shadow in that area. So the way I draw faces, it's very simple, but at the same time we do get a mood from her and we can tell where she's looking, and it does sort of work. I'm just adjusting her jawline because I'm just always looking and checking, so I can see that the line of the jaw disappears sort of right under her hair, so I'm just changing that. Attempting to put fingers in, which is always a dangerous game. And I'm looking and seeing that in my sketch there's this big gap in between her arm and the top of her thigh, whereas actually there isn't much of a gap in between them, so I'm just adjusting it and bringing the line of her thigh up a little bit to meet her arm. So I know I keep saying it, but all the time is just looking, adjusting and changing. If you don't get the sketch completely right first time, you haven't done it wrong. That's completely normal. I don't get the sketch right first time. And then I'm just tidying it up at this point a little bit. And she is pretty much done. So next picture, and this is definitely one of the hardest ones, I wanted to show you why you should always sketch the person and not just the clothes. Even though she's got this big dress covering kind of everything, it's really important to know what the legs are doing underneath. So I'm starting by sketching the arm, because that kind of feels like it's giving direction to the whole kind of the pose. It's got a strong line, that diagonal arm, so I'm sketching that first. So we've got the kind of rounded shoulder, showing where the hand is, and then putting in the knee. The other thing that's really important with this piece is looking for the negative space, so that triangle between her arm, her thigh and her chest is really important, and checking that that triangle is the right shape means I know I'm on track with capturing her pose. If that triangle was not there, or it was huge, or I don't know if it was a square or something, I would know that I've done something wrong. So her dress isn't see-through, but I know from experience roughly where her leg is going to be, and I can see the line of where her calf is, where her thigh is, so I'm kind of working from that and sketching it in and making sure that the bum's kind of level with the foot. Same, she's got a lot of dress and a lot of hair, and it could be tempting with an image like this to just sketch the dress, sketch the hair, and be like, well, I don't know what's going on under there, but it doesn't matter. I'll just stick some feet coming out of the dress, and I'll just kind of put a lot of hair coming out from a hat, and I don't know where the head is, but that doesn't matter. But it means that your feet might end up in the wrong place. It means that the hat might end up being too small, too big. So if we actually sketch the head first, then we know the hat's going to be the right size and in the right position. So yeah, I've sketched the head. She's really looking away, so we can just sort of see the jaw and side of the cheek. I can't even see her nose, and I will put in more hair and hat later, but I just wanted to get that head right and get it in proportion to the rest of the body. Just kind of putting in that puff sleeve and her sunglasses, which give more kind of directionality to the head and kind of the whole mood and the pose. And then a bit of the ground. And then I'm adding another layer for sketching the dress on top. But you really, really do not need an iPad to be sketching people. You can do this in your sketchbook with a pencil. I'm just doing this because it makes the filming process a lot easier, and it makes it clearer for you to see what I'm doing. So I'm putting the dress over the top, and because we have the legs there and the ground, we can see how the dress is going to drape. And then I'm putting in the hat. So thinking about how the hat would sit on her head, so it's tilted slightly back. The brim is pretty much level with us. So I'm reducing the opacity on both of those, and then I'm going to go over the top and kind of neaten it up. And it's not a case of just tracing, as I go along, I'll be looking at mistakes I've made and fixing things. So again, starting with that arm. And I'm moving the hands a little bit further out. I felt like they were a bit close to the body, which is making the arms too short. Putting in that triangle of negative space, and then drawing in the line of the dress and the shoulder kind of sweeps up as far as the hair, and the hair really frames the curve of the shoulder. And then putting in some lines on the dress to kind of show movement and ruching. And then putting in the neck and face and sunglasses. And looking how the hair kind of cuts diagonally across the face and then rests on her back. Putting in her feet, so you can see how the heels are kind of resting on the ground and her toes are slightly lifted up. And filling in her hair, which really kind of pulls it together to have that area of kind of dark colour as that contrast. Just reducing the opacity right down on the layers underneath so I can kind of see how it's looking. Putting in the edge of the wall that she's sitting on. Adding that strand of hair sort of over her face. And putting in a few little shadows. And at this point, I realise that the drape of her dress is wrong, that the way I've done the drape, you can kind of see quite a lot of her bum, whereas actually the drape just comes straight down from her waist. So I've just erased that and moved it over, which looks much better. Which sometimes you don't see it at the time, and that's why it's good to just keep looking, keep checking, keep pausing. You haven't got to get everything right straight away. I think I've also just moved her elbow down because that was too high up. You know, that is the process of drawing people. It is continuously checking and making adjustments. So that's how I do quick sketches of people working from photo reference. And most of those sketches took me about 5 to 7 minutes. So really not long, quite quick sketches, which is very useful if you're sketching on location. You want to include people, but it does obviously take a lot of practice to be able to simplify and sketch people at that speed. So I wouldn't worry if it takes you much longer to begin with. So to recap, my top tips are look for the big shapes that the body is creating, and look for reference points. Look for where different body parts are interacting with other body parts. Look for negative space, often between a waist and an elbow, for example, between legs. And the main thing is just to keep looking at your subject. Look at the reference photo, look at the person, keep looking at them, paying attention, and then looking back at your drawing and checking and adjusting. Don't worry about getting everything right first time. It's all about spotting little mistakes and adjusting and changing as you go along.